He was standing in the middle of a marble lobby he owned, holding his sleeping daughter, and a woman behind the desk was telling him to try the Marriott down the street. She said it without blinking, without hesitation, without a single moment of genuine apology in her voice, and he didn't say a word. He just stood there, tired, grieving, holding those roses. I want you to stay with that image for a second before I tell you the rest of this story, because everything that happens next, the phone call, the review, the woman in the burgundy vest, the job that didn't exist until that night, all of it makes more sense if you understand what that moment actually looked like. A man in a worn jacket, a child asleep against his chest, flowers bending in his hand that he had bought in an airport for a wife who had been gone 3 years. And two people who looked at all of that and decided it wasn't worth a second look. I've been sitting with this story for a few weeks now, and honestly I still feel something in my chest when I get to this part. Because if you've ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, not out of hatred, not even out of cruelty, but out of sheer, practiced indifference, then you already know what I'm going to say before I say it. That kind of dismissal doesn't leave a bruise. It leaves something quieter and harder to name. Let me tell you about Darius Calloway. He was 42 years old, and he had the kind of face that had been lived in, honestly not rough, exactly, but carrying the particular weight of someone who had stopped pretending that certain years hadn't cost him something. He wore a dark canvas jacket, soft at the collar from years of use, and he carried a messenger bag across his chest that held, among other things, a tablet with 3 episodes of a cartoon downloaded for his daughter, a change of clothes for both of them, a Ziploc bag of crackers that had been mostly eaten somewhere over Tennessee, and a stuffed rabbit named Gordon, who had lost one eye to the washing machine 2 months ago, and who Imani, his 7-year-old, had decided was therefore more interesting than before. Imani was asleep on his shoulder. She had been asleep since somewhere over the Alabama state line, which meant Darius had spent the last 90 minutes of the flight moving only his right hand, completely still otherwise, unwilling to shift even slightly and risk waking her. His neck ached in a specific way that only parents of small children recognize, the precise tension of holding yourself hostage to someone else's sleep. In his left hand he carried a bouquet of red roses. He had bought them at Hartsfield-Jackson during the 30-minute window between his connecting gate and his departure, because tomorrow, Thursday, was November 14th, and November 14th was the day his wife Camille had passed away 3 years earlier, and Darius had made a quiet promise to himself somewhere in the first year of grief that he would never let that date arrive in a house without flowers. It had started as something he did for himself. Somewhere in the second year, it had become something he did for Imani. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she understood that the roses mattered. She always chose the vase. The roses were slightly crushed from the flight. One stem had bent at an awkward angle inside the bag. He had noticed, but not fixed it. His hands were occupied. He walked through the revolving doors of the Aldridge Meridian Hotel on Peachtree Street in Atlanta on a Wednesday evening in early November, and moved toward the front desk, slowly, carefully, the way parents learn to walk when the only thing they are trying to avoid is a waking. I need to stop here and tell you something the lobby didn't know. Darius Calloway owned the building. Not in a distant, abstract sense. He owned it the way someone owns something they built through 11 years of decisions, both right and catastrophically wrong. Through a small hospitality group he had started at 31 with a single undercapitalized boutique property in Midtown that had been, in its first year, one bad quarter away from collapse more than once. The Aldridge Meridian was his 7th property. He had a regional director who ran the day-to-day. He had a general manager in this building named Conrad, who had been with the group for 5 years and who ran a tight, professional operation on paper. Darius made it a practice, not a policy, not a procedure, just a personal practice of visiting his own properties unannounced, traveling as himself, checking in as a regular guest, not to catch anyone, not as some kind of executive trap. He had explained it once to his CFO, who had found the habit eccentric, by saying simply, "You cannot understand how a place treats people unless someone treats you like a person instead of an owner." His CFO had nodded politely and remained skeptical. Darius had continued doing it anyway. He approached the front desk. 2 women stood behind it. The first had her hair pinned back in a low bun, a navy blazer, a name tag that read Jessica. Her arms were loosely crossed and her eyes moved across Darius in the quick, practiced way of someone who has learned to assess guests for complexity before they reach the counter. The second woman, Priya, her tag read, stood slightly behind and to the right, watching with a mirrored expression. Not hostile, not exactly. More like preemptively decided. "Good evening," Darius said, keeping his voice low. "Checking in. Last name Calloway." Jessica looked at the computer screen, then back at him. "I'm not seeing a reservation under that name. It may have been booked through a corporate account," he said. "Could you check again?" There was a pause. Honestly, I know that pause. You know that pause. It's the pause of someone deciding how much effort they're willing to spend on a problem before they've finished hearing what the problem is. It lasts maybe 2 seconds. It communicates something very clearly. And it is almost never about the reservation. "Sir," Jessica said, "even if there were a booking issue, we're at full capacity tonight. There's a large corporate event on the upper floors. I'm afraid there's simply nothing available." Darius shifted Imani's weight carefully. She murmured something, a single soft syllable, and settled back into sleep, her hand tightening slightly on Gordon, the one-eyed rabbit. "I understand it's a busy night," he said. "But if you could look one more time, I'd really appreciate it. My daughter needs to sleep somewhere that isn't a lobby chair, and it's been a long day." He said it quietly, without edge. He was not performing patience, he was simply exercising it, the way he had learned to exercise it over years of building something that required him to understand that people rarely respond well to being pressured, and almost always respond to being spoken to like human beings. Something passed between Jessica and Priya, not words. Not even a look, exactly. More like a shared frequency, a private agreement communicated the way only people who have worked together long enough to develop a shared language of small signals can communicate. And what moved between them in that moment was not cruelty. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't cruelty. It was something smaller, and in some ways worse. It was the decision that this particular situation had already been categorized. The tired man in the worn jacket with the sleeping child was a walk-in hoping to get lucky on a sold-out night, and the kindest thing to do was redirect him efficiently. That decision had been made before he finished speaking. "I'm really sorry," Jessica said, in a tone that had learned to sound like sorry without carrying any of the weight of it. "There's nothing we can do tonight. The Marriott on Cortlandt is usually good about walk-ins. I'd try there," Priya added, almost as an afterthought, the way people add things when they want to seem helpful without actually helping. This time of year in Atlanta, without a confirmed reservation, it can be tough. "Definitely call ahead next time." Darius stood there. He didn't say anything for a moment. And I think about that moment a lot. Actually, what it must have been like to stand there, this tired, grieving man, holding his sleeping daughter and a bouquet of roses he bought for a woman who wasn't there to receive them, being told to go somewhere else. By people who worked in his building. In a hotel he had spent 11 years building. He could have said something. He could have ended it in 15 seconds. He had his phone in his jacket pocket and Conrad's number in his recent calls. He didn't reach for it, because he wanted to understand what was happening, not just react to it. "Is there a manager available?" he asked quietly. "The manager is upstairs with the event," Jessica said. "I can't pull him for a room availability question. I'm sorry." It was at that exact moment, that precise, unremarkable Wednesday evening moment, that a woman came through a side door near the concierge alcove, carrying an armful of fresh-pressed linens. Her name tag said Vera. She was somewhere in her early 50s, with silver-threaded dark hair, pulled back simply, and the kind of posture that comes not from training but from decades of physical work. She wore the burgundy vest of the hotel's housekeeping supervisors, and she had been heading toward the linen closet near the elevator bank when she registered the scene at the front desk, the way some people simply register when something is off. She stopped. She set the linens on a luggage cart. She walked over. "Excuse me," she said, and she said it to Darius, not to her colleagues. "Is everything okay? Can I help with something?" Darius looked at her. And I imagine there was something in her face that he hadn't seen since walking through the revolving doors, a simple, unhurried attention. The kind that costs nothing and means everything when you've been standing somewhere long enough to feel invisible. "I have a reservation that's not coming up in the system," he said, "and I've been told the hotel is full." Vera glanced at the computer, then at Jessica. "Did you check the secondary tab?" she asked. Bookings made through executive or corporate partner accounts don't always pull in the standard search. You have to go one layer down. Jessica's expression shifted a quick flicker of something between irritation and uncertainty. "I checked the system." "The secondary tab," Vera said again, and this time there was something under the gentleness that had acquired a very clear and specific weight. A pause. Jessica clicked through the screen. The lobby was quiet except for the distant sound of an elevator arriving. Her face changed. "There's a reservation here," she said slowly. "Callaway. Under. Corporate executive bookings." "I thought there might be," Vera said simply. She turned to Darius then, fully, and looked at him the way she had clearly decided somewhere, years ago, without making a policy of it, to look at every person who came through a door tired or hurting or simply in need of being seen, not through them, at them. And she saw the roses. "Those are beautiful," she said softly. "Are they for a special occasion?" Darius looked down at the flowers in his free hand. The bent stem, the crushed blooms that had been fighting traffic and altitude, and a carry-on bag since Atlanta's airport. "Tomorrow is the anniversary," he said quietly. "My wife. She passed 3 years ago." He adjusted Imani against his shoulder. The small hand tightened on the rabbit. "We have a tradition. She always picks the vase." He tilted his head slightly toward Imani. "His sleeping daughter. Who always picked the vase now?" Vera was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of not knowing what to say, the silence of someone deciding to let something matter before they respond to it. "I'm so sorry," she said. And then she looked at Imani, the sleep-soft face, the braids coming loose, the 7-year-old weight of a child who trusted her father completely, and she said, "She's beautiful. Poor thing. She's exhausted." "It's been a long day for both of us," Darius said. And something in his voice, something small, gave way a little. Vera looked at the bouquet again. Without asking, without making a production of it, she reached out and gently repositioned the bent stem, the one that had been angled wrong since somewhere over Georgia, and settled it back into alignment with the others. A small gesture. An impossibly small gesture. And yet, if you have ever been in a moment where you were carrying more than you could comfortably carry, grief and exhaustion and a sleeping child and a bouquet of flowers for someone who isn't there, and someone noticed one small, unnecessary thing and fixed it without being asked, then you already understand what happened in Darius Calloway's chest in that lobby on a Wednesday night in November. Someone finally saw him. Not the reservation, not the inconvenience. Him. "Let me find you a vase before you go up," Vera said. "You shouldn't have to carry those bent all the way to your room." She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like it was simply what you did. Honestly, I have to pause here because I'm not sure I would have done what she did. I want to be honest with you. I was not the one being dismissed at that desk. I'm not the one who had to stand there. But I am the one telling you this story, and I feel responsible to tell you that the thing Vera did, stopping, setting down her linens, asking, pushing back, fixing the stem, offering the vase, she did all of that with no information. She didn't know who Darius was. She didn't know he owned the building. She just saw a tired father and a sleeping child and a bent flower and thought, someone should do something about that. That instinct, that particular, unremarkable, uncelebrated instinct, is the entire story. She retrieved a simple glass vase from behind the concierge desk and filled it quietly with water from the back office. And when she returned and helped Darius arrange the roses, the blooms opened a little in the water, the bent one straightening enough to look like it belonged. Darius thanked her. "It's nothing," she said. "It's truly the least this place should have done 20 minutes ago." She said the last part clearly enough that Jessica and Priya both heard it. What happened next unfolded without drama, which is how the most important things usually unfold. Darius checked in. He went upstairs. Imani woke just long enough to put the roses in the vase herself, which she did with the grave, focused attention that 7-year-olds bring to things they understand are important without being able to say why, and then she fell back asleep on the hotel bed with Gordon tucked under one arm. and Darius sat in the chair by the window for a while in the dark. He thought about Camille. He thought about the lobby. He thought about Vera. He thought about the difference between people who had learned the words of hospitality and people who simply carried its meaning in their bodies without needing to be taught. The next morning, before he went up to the executive floor to find Conrad, he did something he had done countless times in his career. He found the housekeeping break room behind the service elevator, a small, fluorescent-lit room with a folding table and a coffee maker that had clearly seen better years, and he knocked gently on the open door. Vera looked up from a sandwich and began to stand. "Please," he said, "don't. I just needed a minute." He sat across from her. And then he told her who he was. She went very still. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. "For last night, for stopping, for checking the tab, for the vase." He paused. "For asking about the roses." Vera's expression moved through several things in quick succession: surprise, comprehension, and then a kind of embarrassed discomfort that kind people often feel when their kindness is named directly, as if it is somehow worse to be seen being good than to simply be good quietly. "It was nothing," she said again. "I just don't like watching people get the runaround, especially not a father traveling alone with a little one." She looked at the table for a moment. "I raised 3 by myself after my husband passed. I know what that tired looks like. You recognize it." Darius was quiet. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "At this property?" 7 years, she said. "Housekeeping most of that." "Supervisor?" "For the last 3. He nodded slowly. "Vera, I'm restructuring our guest experience training program. The actual curriculum, what we teach new hires about what hospitality is, not the script version, the real version." He leaned forward slightly. "I think you should help design it, more than help, actually. I think you should run it, across all 7 properties." She looked at him. "I clean rooms, Mr. Calloway." "Last night," he said, "you saw a tired man, and a sleeping child, and a bent flower, and you fixed all 3 things in about 90 seconds. Without title. Without instruction. Without anyone asking you to." He held her gaze. 2 trained, certificated front desk staff stood 3 feet from that man for 20 minutes and saw none of it. "That is not a small difference, Vera. That is the entire difference. And I want to pay you to teach other people how to see what you see." She didn't answer right away. She took a breath. Then another. "Let me think about it," she said. She thought about it for 4 days. She called her oldest daughter, who is apparently the kind of woman who does not mince words, and who reportedly told her mother that she would be a fool of historic proportions to say no. She accepted on a Friday morning with a brief email to the address Darius had left her, which said only, "I accept, and I'd like to start with the front desk teams." Darius smiled when he read it. He thought that was probably the right place to start. The role she stepped into did not exist before that November night. It was built specifically around what she had already been doing without a title, without recognition, and without anyone having thought to make it a job. Regional Coordinator for Guest Experience, a position whose curriculum, in its first draft, included a single line at the top of the training document that read, "Before you look at the reservation, look at the person." On the wall of her new office, a real office, with a window, Vera kept a small framed photograph. Not of the hotel, not of any award. A photo of a glass vase with red roses in it, one stem slightly straighter than the rest. Darius had sent it to her the week after November 14th, along with a card that read, "Thank you for seeing us when it would have been so easy not to." Imani, for her part, remembered almost nothing of that specific evening. She had been asleep for most of it. But children carry warmth without carrying detail. And she carried something from that night, vague and wordless, the way young children store the things that matter. A woman with silver in her hair who had smiled at her while she was pretending to be asleep. Warm light. Red roses in a clear vase. Years later, when she was old enough to understand the kind of man her father was, the quiet, unannounced way he moved through the world, checking on the things that mattered, instead of trusting only the reports. She asked him once why that night had stayed with him so clearly, out of all the nights of travel he had accumulated over a career. And Darius told her what he believed to be true, that he had spent 11 years building something, and that he had needed to be reminded, on a Wednesday night in Atlanta, of the reason he had built it. Not the revenue, not the portfolio. The reason. That kindness rarely announces itself. It comes quietly in the form of someone choosing to look one more time, someone putting down their linens when they didn't have to, someone fixing a bent stem because they noticed it was bent, and they were the kind of person who fixes small things. And the people who do that without title, without expectation, without anyone watching are very often the ones who deserve most to be truly seen. That's what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. Not the dismissal, which I think we can all agree was a failure of basic human decency dressed up in busy night logistics, but the remedy. The remedy didn't come from the top. It came from someone carrying linens. This story taught me that the systems we build in business, in hospitality, in any organization that involves human beings serving other human beings, tend to reflect not just our policies but our culture. And culture is not built by the people writing the training manuals. It's built by the Veras, the ones who stop when they don't have to stop, the ones who ask when they don't have to ask, the ones who notice a bent stem at the end of a long shift and decide, for no reason other than that it's the right thing to do, to fix it. The mistake most people make is thinking that hospitality is a department. It isn't. It never was. It's a character trait, and you cannot train it into someone who isn't already carrying it. What you can do, what Darius did, is notice it, name it, build around it, pay it what it deserves. If you've ever worked somewhere and felt like the person who always noticed things, always stopped, always cared just a little more than the job required, this story is for you. You are not invisible, even when it feels that way. Sometimes the right person just hasn't walked through the door yet. And if you've ever been on the other side standing in a lobby with something heavy in your hands and someone looking right through you, I hope you know that there are Veras everywhere. You just have to make it long enough to run into one. I want to ask you something before we go. Drop a 1, 2, or 3 inches the comments. 1 if you think Darius handled the situation with more grace than most people would have. 2 if you think he should have spoken up sooner at the desk. And 3 if Vera is the one you're thinking about long after this story ends. I have a feeling I already know which number is going to flood the comments. Also, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? I love knowing where these stories land. And if you've ever been in a moment like this, one dismissed, overlooked, reduced to an inconvenience by someone who didn't take the time to look closer, I want to hear about it. Your story matters. Drop it below. If you're new here, and this is the first time we've crossed paths, welcome. This is what we do in this space. We find the stories that teach us something true about people, and we sit with them long enough to let them do their work. If that sounds like your kind of place, there's a subscribe button below. It's free, and it means we get to keep doing this together. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.